Live from Washington, D.C., Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. And now, Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, Sekulow.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the broadcast. So we're talking about this situation with, again, with Representative Tlaib. Listen, anytime there's a major flare-up of anti-Semitism, you're going to hear about it right here. We've been fighting this for a long, long time. We have an office in Jerusalem. I'm going to set the stage for this. We have an office in Jerusalem. We have an office in Strasbourg, France. We have appeared before the United Nations on the issue of anti-Semitism. We are in federal court in Washington, D.C. on an issue what I consider the fundamental anti-Semitism. In fact, Andy Economou, that case in Washington, D.C., is trying to relitigate the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state.
Yes, and I hope we will ultimately be successful, but this is what Congresswoman Tlaib was really after. She does not recognize the right of Israel to remain and to be a sovereign, independent, and protected nation. So what she does is she couches her words in anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish sentiment, okay? And she is really saying what she really feels when she says the Holocaust gives her a kind of a calming feeling. It gives me a kind of a disgusting feeling. And how she can make that statement in the same sentence and then try to recast it and say, well, what I really meant is that the Palestinians were creating a safe haven for Israel. I don't see that to be the case historically. It's not a safe haven at all. If anything ever happened, God forbid, and the Palestinians were to take over from the Israeli lands, the real sufferers, you know who's going to be the sufferers in addition to the Jewish population, is the Christian population is really going to be the sufferers, because those holy Christian sites are going to be demolished by the Muslims. Because I have spoken with the Patriarch of Jerusalem, the Greek Orthodox Patriarch, and he says, the sovereign here must remain Israel, because if he doesn't, there won't be a holy sepulcher. So the Christians need to wake up to that reality too.
All right, so the reaction on, let's play Tlaib's site. We've got new people joining us. Let's play what she said. Here it is.
2 weeks ago or so, we celebrated, it took a moment, I think, in our country to remember the Holocaust. And there's a kind of a calming feeling. I always tell folks, when I think of the Holocaust and the tragedy of the Holocaust, and the fact that it was my ancestors, Palestinians, who lost their land and some lost their lives.
Let me tell you what your ancestors were doing. Okay? Representative Tlaib, take a look at this picture. Here's the evidence. I like showing evidence. Take a look at this picture. This is a picture of the Grand Mufti, your relatives in the generic sense, meeting with Adolf Hitler, saying that we had the same enemies, the Jews, the British, the Americans, and the communists. Those were the same. And so the Grand Mufti's meeting with Adolf Hitler. So look at this response. You're starting to see Israeli writers, Jewish leadership, especially within the groups of authors saying, hey, Representative Tlaib, I'm humbled that my ancestors provided free land and property for Arab Middle Eastern countries after we were violently forced out of our own lands. I mean, this is true. That's the history that they're trying to rewrite here, Wes.
Yeah, they really are. And think about this whole two-state solution that we mentioned a little bit ago. Every time Israel has tried to adopt that, every time they give up land, and even Prime Minister Netanyahu, early on in his administration years ago, gave up land. What happens? The Palestinians launch terrorist attacks against Israel from those same lands. Israel protects the rights of all people who live there. Israel is the only country in the area who guarantees freedom of religion. And Andy's exactly right. If Israel were not, the power there would not be freedom of religion. Christians and Jews would be attacked, and attempts would be to eliminate them totally.
Yeah, I think that the fact is, she is speaking to a history that doesn't exist, also equating, if you line yourself up with the Nazis, does anyone here in the United States say, okay, those people who decide to align themselves with the Nazis, pity them? No. Do you say, if you line yourself with the Soviet Union, pity them? No. Nope. We take them out. We're still taking them out. Look at Cuba. Look at Venezuela. I mean, we still are saying, if you align yourself with these kind of ideologies and anti-human rights and abusing your own people and these state institutions that you mass imprisonment, we will take you down.
But Andy, you don't think this is no slip of the tongue?
It was not a slip of the tongue. It was the reality of what she said came out first, and then the stark realization of what she said came out second, and she tried to walk it back, in my view, unsuccessfully.
We've got a petition up because we think these congressmen promoting this anti-Semitism need to be censured. Sign that petition at aclj.org or call the number that's on your screen, aclj.org. It's the easiest way for you to do it. We encourage you to do it. We'll be back with more in just a moment.
The rise of anti-Semitism is deeply concerning and problematic. All too often, we see the hate unfold before our very eyes. The deadly violence permeates our world. Synagogues are now the targets of attacks. At the American Center for Law and Justice, we're fully engaged in the battle to defend Israel's interests and the Jewish people from these kind of hateful attacks. We're fighting at the UN and at the International Criminal Court. Anti-Semitism is now in full display in Congress and in the media outlets. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar has repeatedly engaged in anti-Semitic rhetoric. She said that support for Israel is, quote, all about the Benjamins, a bigoted accusation that Jews control all the money. And the New York Times published a blatantly anti-Semitic cartoon targeting President Trump and Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu. When we have politicians making anti-Semitic comments and mass media outlets publishing anti-Israel and anti-Jewish cartoons, it's time to take action. Add your name to our petition to stop anti-Semitism now. Online at aclj.org.
All right, we're going to go to our phones as we're talking about this latest eruption of anti-Semitism. But, I just asked this question of, and I'll ask everybody to comment on this. Start with Jordan. No reaction, right, as if we're on the air right now at least, no reaction from the Democratic leadership. Where is Chuck Schumer? Where is Jerry Nadler? Where is Adam Schiff? Where are they?
The only person they put out is her fellow congressman from Michigan, Kildee, whose uncle was the congressman for 40 years, and then he became the congressman in 2012, and his family from Flint, Michigan, so pretty nearby, neighboring her congressional district. And he comes out, take a listen. This is as far as the Democrats will go.
I'm going to have to talk to Rashida to have a better understanding of what she meant. I interpreted it to mean a calming feeling that there was a haven for Jews fleeing the Holocaust that was Palestine, that was the place that now is the state of Israel. But again, everyone, whether it's Congresswoman Tlaib or those responding to her or the president, we all need to understand that words matter and we have to be careful about how we say things because often they can become interpreted in a way that's very hurtful.
First of all, that is nice try legally. But you talk about juxtapositions and oxymorons. Here's what she said. She finds it, what was the word she used? Calming. That was one of the words that after she said celebrate. Not calming that the Jews had a place to go because she then says her relatives got kicked out of their own land. This is a tit for tat statement. Exactly. Really.
So I think that's what she's saying. I think she's saying it's like a tit for tat. It's like, well, this happened to them, this happened to us. And both like
poetic justice.
Yes, I do think that's what she said. It's like well, that happened to them, but then look what happened to us. And the truth is, you look at the Muslim community in that region of the world. They're not going anywhere. They're not.
A lot of places for them to be.
Yeah, yes.
To live.
This is a tiny sliver.
Most important sliver in the world.
And but they've made it this politicized way. It used to be a city that everybody could visit, everybody could go to from different religious backgrounds. And instead, when you start firing hundreds of rockets in a week from the Gaza Strip, you know what we do as a world? We say, you're going to have a humanitarian crisis in your country. You're not going to be able to run your hospitals.
Right.
Your people are going to fall apart on your own. And at some point, they're going to have to decide: do they buy into the ideology? So they're going to die with this? Are they going to die with it? And if they are, we're going to make sure they will. that is what you do in wars. This is a group who provokes the conflict. They are saying, "Come to us, start the battle. Here we go. We're gonna send over 700 rockets into your town and see what you do." And if the people in the region say, well, we'll keep supporting this. We're going to keep sending our sons, our daughters to support this. Then that's a war. That is a conflict. And in a conflict, you have to pick sides. That this community has chosen sides, it has decided, and world history has gotten to choose sides many times.
And they take the same side every time.
Has been a losing
Yes.
side. And I think that some of that is, again, you can go back a long time in history to the beginning of the history as we know it. Let's put it that way. But I also think that with Rashida Tlaib and these individuals, they are putting a horrendous face on Islam. I mean, and Islam in America. And I think that was it just last week too? The one Muslim cleric that they invited to Congress was also tied to really horrific anti-Semitic comments. So it's tough to find an Islamic leader who's not tied to the Muslim Brotherhood, who's not tied to CARE, who's not tied to all of these different bad actors, whether you are Jewish or not. If you're an American, are bad actors. So I mean, these are enemies of the United States. Ultimately, we're the great Satan
right
now. It's not so much the Jews anymore. I think it's us. I think that we are actually their ultimate enemy. And this, we talked about creeping Sharia sometimes. This is part of it. People think that is a subterm of just scare tactic term. And
no, because there's no reaction to it from the leadership
this is
of the party where it's coming out of. So it becomes if this is
acceptable,
normative.
then imagine what's happened on college campuses, places where no one's getting recorded.
Right. So that's a whole different topic of problem. Ilhan Omar said this, the Congresswoman, how many more protesters must be shot, rockets must be fired, and little kids must be killed until the endless cycle of violence ends? Well, who shot the rockets, Andy?
Hamas, ask Hamas that question. She wants to know how many more protesters have got to be shot, rockets fired, and little kids killed. Ask Hamas. Wasn't it Ariel Sharon who moved Israel out of Gaza and said, you can take it, it's yours, it's all yours, have it, good luck to you, sei gesund. Right. And what did they do? The Hamas terrorists took over the country and the Gaza Strip, an ancient strip. One of the great writers of Christianity, Dorotheus of Gaza, was from there. And now it is a wasteland. And every once in a while, the natives get restless and start doing what? Bombing Israel. And that's exactly what happened.
This was a Palestinian opportunity, too, when they got the Gaza Strip, which borders the Mediterranean. So to have a port, to have access to the world.
The port of Gaza is big.
And instead, what do you do? Well, you elect a radical group. So what does the world do? They say, we're going to cut you off. And it's not just the Jews in Israel. It's also the Egyptians,
right,
who cut them off, who say, we're not going to let you use our border anymore because you're starting terrorist camps across and into our territory, into a no man's land. What is a legal no man's land in the Sinai Peninsula? And the Egyptian Arabs said, we're cutting you off, Gaza. The Lebanese don't want to deal with Gaza. In fact, I mean, you got a whole Hezbollah problem there. And I think what happened is the world was focused on ISIS. And a lot of the resources and the Sunni extremist groups, which are more linked to Hamas, were backed. Were fighting with ISIS too. So you had the Al Qaeda linked Hamas kind of groups, Sunni groups fighting with the ISIS groups. Now that's kind of stopped. So that battle's over. That's gone to the hills in Afghanistan now. So what immediately begins? I mean, immediately starts is the Gaza conflict. It was pretty quiet for these last 8-9 years because of the disastrous of ISIS. And I think that the world, even the Islamic radicals' resources, that's what they're pouring into. Iran wasn't provoking nearly as much because they were sending their resources to Syria. The Lebanese and Hezbollah, you didn't hear much from them. Suddenly now you're hearing all from them too about their rockets and all and their technology. They were all pouring in. Now that conflict is dissipating, so it's not the kind of thousands of sending troops and resources. I think that this is now a new reality, which people kind of tend to forget, is that this is the reality for Israel dealing with these groups, and it's been just a quiet 8 years. But it's why Netanyahu gets reelected. It's
exactly
why the young people in Israel tend to be more conservative,
more hawkish.
Yes, and because they're dealing with the realities of their where they live.
So she then said, this is Ilhan Omar, Andy, the status quo of occupation and humanitarian crisis in Gaza is unsustainable. The status quo of occupation? What occupation?
There is no occupation of Gaza. Israel has left Gaza. I mean, no one occupies it but Hamas terrorists, and she doesn't know what she's talking about. This is truly, when you take the word ignorant, a woman who doesn't know what she's talking about. She's making a stupid, foolish
but they're
remark.
doing this on purpose. I mean, this is all being done on purpose.
It's done with design, Jay. Correct.
Only real justice, Wes, can bring about security and lasting peace.
Yeah. The humanitarian crisis is created by Hamas and to a certain extent by the Palestinian Authority, which mismanages their funds and pays terrorists, and their families. There is a real humanitarian crisis. It's not caused by Israel. There are children suffering because of Hamas. Hamas routinely puts their rocket launchers and their other weapons depots in kindergartens and schools and hospitals, daring Israel to attack, and Israel tries not to attack them. Whenever citizens in Gaza tried to resist Hamas, for example, there was one family that did not want them to put a rocket battery near their house. They jailed the father of the family. This is who is leading Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and these are the people that are creating the humanitarian crisis, not Israel.
Harry, so when they say only real justice, when she says only real justice can bring about security and lasting peace, what does she mean?
Well,
the elimination of the Jewish state?
Absolutely. So it's a sophisticated way of saying, let's destroy Israel as a nation state. And you should also look at this particular issue in the context, for instance, of the BDS movement, which is a sophisticated attempt to destroy the nation state of Israel. But it's also important to keep in mind that the attacks on Israel by Representative Tlaib and Representative Omar are simply attempts to distract attention from the despotic misrule of Arab leaders in the Palestinian Authority and in Gaza, who profit from endless conflict while the Palestinian people pay the price. So there is clearly an humanitarian crisis in Palestine, but it is one that is made by the leadership of the Palestinian people. So what you really need is the removal of the Palestinian Authority and the removal of Hamas in Gaza in order for the people of those two areas to be made free and to move forward economically and on a humanitarian basis.
We know this region, folks. We've got an office in Jerusalem. As I said, we've been at the UN. We are in U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C., fighting this out right now. We are at the halls of Congress. But where is the leadership of the Democratic Party? And why are you tolerating this? What is in it? Are you that afraid of that part of the base that you're going to allow this to go on? Just say it's wrong. She's not going to come out and say it's wrong. You could say it's wrong. We've got a petition up because we think these congressmen promoting this anti-Semitism need to be censured. Sign that petition at aclj.org or call the number that's on your screen, aclj.org. It's the easiest way for you to do it. We encourage you to do it. We'll be back with more in just a moment.
The rise of anti-Semitism is deeply concerning and problematic. All too often, we see the hate unfold before our very eyes. The deadly violence permeates our world. Synagogues are now the targets of attacks. At the American Center for Law and Justice, we're fully engaged in the battle to defend Israel's interests and the Jewish people from these kind of hateful attacks. We're fighting at the UN and at the International Criminal Court. Anti-Semitism is now in full display in Congress and in the media outlets. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar has repeatedly engaged in anti-Semitic rhetoric. She said that support for Israel is, quote, all about the Benjamins, a bigoted accusation that Jews control all the money. And the New York Times published a blatantly anti-Semitic cartoon targeting President Trump and Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu. When we have politicians making anti-Semitic comments and mass media outlets publishing anti-Israel and anti-Jewish cartoons, it's time to take action. Add your name to our petition to stop anti-Semitism now. Online at aclj.org.
All right, welcome back to the broadcast, everyone. Taking your calls. Last segments, we take all of your questions. Let's go right to the phones, Jordan.
Yeah, let's go to Cynthia in California on line 1. Cynthia, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Thank you for taking my call. I have a question. And first of all, I have Jewish family members. Is the Jewish community coming together to make an outcry against these anti-Semitic leaders, or are the Jewish Americans depending on your organization to speak out on their behalf?
Well, look, the Anti-Defamation League and others have come out, Zionist Organization of America, they come out condemning this. There's no question about that. Here's the problem. The Democratic leadership right now is afraid to. I mean, I think that's a fair statement. Now, let me tell you about the ACLJ. We're not afraid to. We're calling it exactly as we see it. And as I said, we're not just talking about it on radio, though I'm very glad we're able to talk to people about this because it's a huge issue. But also, it's a rising issue. So it's an issue that is increasing in concern. Both, like Jordan said, we haven't even talked about the college campuses where we've got cases going on all the time. We've just signed up a new professor we're representing. I mean, horrific situation he finds himself in because he's pro-Israel. And the lack of tolerance on the academic institutions, Harry, is palpable. I mean, we haven't even addressed that issue yet. I mean, we're addressing it in our work at the ACLJ.
So if we take a step back for the moment, we should note that Representative Tlaib and to some extent Representative Omar have fell into traps of their own making. And both of these two individuals are unable to extricate themselves from, in my judgment, their own confusion, in part because they are afraid to acknowledge that their statements represent their true feelings about the nation state of Israel. On the other hand, the House Democratic leadership is paralyzed by the possibility of being called Islamophobic. Apparently, they would rather be called anti-Semitic as they continue to make unforced errors that really defy rational explanation. So that is, I think, the key problem.
But the problem is, I mean, I agree with everything you said, Harry, but the problem here is that she says it and there's no repercussion for this. Some generic, we're opposed to anti-Semitism resolution, but not the leadership of the party, Wes, saying this is wrong.
No, I think for whatever irrational reason, they are held hostage, basically,
Unreal.
by a very extreme and growing left-wing part of the Democrat Party.
Which will never win a general election for presidency
in the House of
United
Representatives.
States.
And here's the thing I think about, Jay. I think people like these two congresswomen, actually, they talk about the plight of the Palestinian people, and it is heartbreaking. But they hate Israel more than they care for the Palestinians. Because if you really cared for the Palestinians, for example, in the Gaza Strip, you would stand with Israel, who wants to solve it and bring humanitarian aid in, and you would take a stance against Hamas, which actually fired the 700 rockets. But they allowed their bias to cloud their professional judgment.
But Andy, there's something you said earlier I think is important to reiterate here, and that is the Christian minority within Israel, which is protected, including especially not just the right to worship, which is clearly protected, but those holy sites, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, Golgotha. I mean, I could go through the whole list. The what we would call the New Testament holy sites, the Christian holy sites, would be an unbelievable risk if the Grand Mufti was running Israel.
The Christians better pray earnestly that Israel maintains the sovereignty in the region, because if the Arabs, Muslims, if that community was ever to take over those holy sites, or Israel was to be eviscerated and God forbid, removed as a nation of the earth, there is no Christian site that is sacred that will be left standing in what is now the state of Israel, because it will be obliterated completely by the Muslims.
Yeah, you heard Rashida Tlaib speak, so you know that when she speaks, I mean, she's got a full grasp. It's not like this is English or second language, okay?
Right.
But her Twitter account looks like if you literally copy and paste it into like Google Translate, something that you would hear from a very radical, extreme leader. I don't have to name one for you. There's plenty of them out there. But it's this kind of language, I think, too. This was her response. So this was her chance to respond, and can't ever leave it with just a simple statement. So it's policing my words, twisting and turning them to ignite vile attacks on me will not work. This is the key. All of you who are trying to silence me will fail miserably. I will never allow you to take my words out of context to push your racist, hateful agenda. The truth will always win. Remember when Ilhan Omar said we get our own truths? And now we're saying from her, all of you trying to silence me will fail miserably. I mean, that sounds like Saddam Hussein. It sounds like Omar Baghdadi. And that is what they sound like when they speak from the when they blast over the minarets. Radical language. If you are one of the two women who is Muslim and you decide to go on magazine covers and promote yourself and do interviews So you're bringing the attention. You're already a congressman, so every attention is deserved because you work for the U.S. taxpayers and your district. But then you decide to be a standout, if you will, and say, come look at me, come see me. I'm going to keep talking to you. I'm going to keep running my mouth over and over, and then get upset when people listen and get upset and then threaten people. I mean, you will, those trying to silence people fail miserably. Where? At what in the United States? I mean, we don't fail by speech, right? If she has the right to say it, don't I get the right to say it? We don't fail miserably. Failing miserably sounds like killing somebody.
Fail miserably says, I'm going to silence you.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm going to silence you. I'm going to take you out. Your voice will no longer be heard. There will be no voice for you. I mean, that is what that means.
And no one's trying to silence her. They're criticizing her.
Yeah.
She's confusing freedom of speech with freedom from criticism. She has freedom of speech.
It's the same kind of language, the same kind of rhetoric. And here we are in 2019, and we're having to deal with this. And anti-Semitism, when it rears its head, does not bode well for the people, for the Jewish people. But now you do have a state of Israel. And you've got, I think you've got world leaders that understand what's happening. Although you look at what's going on in England right now, and Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the Labour Party. Harry, we only got a minute here, 30 seconds. It's outrageous.
Absolutely. So this is a worldwide phenomena. And at the ACLJ, we need to be eternally vigilant and be prepared to take action to counter these anti-Semitic attacks in the United States and abroad.
That's going to do it for the broadcast today. We've got a petition up. We think the congressmen and women that are spewing this anti-Semitism, that's one direct action we can take here, need to be censured. And they could do that in Congress. Not just said, that's inappropriate. There needs to be some action. We encourage that to take place. Sign the petition at aclj.org or call the number that's on your screen right now. We encourage you to do that. Also, pray for our team. We're fighting this in court. We're fighting this at the UN. We're fighting this through our offices in Jerusalem. Your support makes a huge difference to the ACLJ. We encourage you to do it. We'll be back with you next week.
The rise of anti-Semitism is deeply concerning and problematic. All too often, we see the hate unfold before our very eyes. The deadly violence permeates our world. Synagogues are now the targets of attacks. At the American Center for Law and Justice, we're fully engaged in the battle to defend Israel's interests and the Jewish people from these kind of hateful attacks. We're fighting at the UN and at the International Criminal Court. Anti-Semitism is now in full display in Congress and in the media outlets. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar has repeatedly engaged in anti-Semitic rhetoric. She said that support for Israel is, quote, all about the Benjamins, a bigoted accusation that Jews control all the money. And the New York Times published a blatantly anti-Semitic cartoon targeting President Trump and Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu. When we have politicians making anti-Semitic comments and mass media outlets publishing anti-Israel and anti-Jewish cartoons, it's time to take action. Add your name to our petition to stop anti-Semitism now. Online at aclj.org.